good
It's a
time
very-
to advertise
so
the sewer line
here's the-
protection plan through your local utility.
Yeah, you can get that, except that right now, well, never mind, I won't go there. You can get that, hopefully you get a good person from the,
Vendor.
from the products and services
Sorry
company.
to get you off course, Councilwoman.
No, yeah, don't do that. So here's the thing. This is what doesn't make sense. You have to be responsible, and this is why nobody can understand this. You have to be responsible for the sidewalk, but you have no control over the tree. Whether it's, trimming it. I got dead trees sitting out there for years, still turned in, trying to get taken down. Some of them, so I don't know what species of tree that is that has those roots that are actually go straight in, headed towards and into the foundations of these houses. And then on top of that, we have, the city has come up with, besides the 50/50 program, they've come up with this hazardous sidewalk program where they will fix your hazardous sidewalk for free.
TDS, tree damage sidewalk.
Tree
program.
damage sidewalks.
Yes.
Okay. That is done the year after the street is resurfaced. All streets aren't getting resurfaced at the same time. And God knows, when I came in, I used to be able to do 10 streets a year. Now I'm lucky to do 4. Okay, now, on top of that, I have a real bone to pick over the brick streets, because the brick streets are never going to be repaved. I'm not putting, we have an ordinance on brick streets. They are to be maintained. They're not going to be repaved. That means that those streets will never get the benefit of the tree damage sidewalk.
Can I just I apologize. Stay on course, know where you are. Just so to our friends who may not be council members, the TDS program, really, we've only gotten 3 good years out of the program. It is a new program, which, thanks to the voters in the city of Cleveland, gave us some flexibility in our funding. So the tree damage sidewalk program is new. Many of us have only had a couple of streets. There was a pilot in, I think, Ohio City and Ward 1 about 5 years ago, and then funding dried up. And then the tax issue 32, and then it came back, and now we're trying to catch up. So just background.
Yeah, but the deal is this. Everybody doesn't get the same opportunity even for that program. Because if you have a brick street, and I'm one of the wards, I think me, Carrie, McCormick, and Polensik have like the most brick streets in our wards. And I have I have a street that's horrible. I'm dealing with it myself. But that's not right.
Yeah.
That is not right, because they should be able to participate. They should be able to be taken into account, and those streets should be included in the tree damage sidewalk program. So if there's anything that we can do in the charter, I'm sure that would pass with flying colors. So then it's by ordinance, or is it by policy?
It is by ordinance.
It is by ordinance.
The tree damage sidewalk program is by ordinance. The policy is to do streets that have just been resurfaced, which council agreed with, because otherwise it would become political and everybody in your ward would get it and I'd get none again, right? So we had to have some policy as to the TDS program, and council agreed that if it follows the resurfacing, then at least there's a method to it, and it wouldn't become a political firestorm.
Except for one thing, they told me
Brick
that they
streets
weren't
that
going to
we've
do
come up
West
with.
Boulevard tree damage sidewalks. I don't know why.
Probably because West Boulevard was done with state funds.
Nope.
Okay, I don't know why. I didn't do it.
I know. I'm just telling you. We're on TV. They're watching us. So that's why I do that, so that they can hear me.
The people on West Boulevard or what?
No, the administration. I used to always talk to Ken Silliman on television, because I know he watched.
You probably still watch.
The deal is the sidewalk issue. Okay, if we can drop it in the charter, if it's not in the charter, but, just so that everybody knows, we have a problem with sidewalks. And we have a problem with an inequity of how sidewalks are being repaired. And there's a lot of people that don't have that 50%. And even when we try to put some of our funding in to defer the other 50%, we're not permitted to do that. I've asked, Councilman Casey I know has asked, and it's
all
very,
asked.
very frustrating. I don't understand
Yeah.
that at all,
It's-
especially because it's a public right-of-way.
But it goes to the funding and the legal consequences of the
But the
funding.
person doesn't, I understand all that, but it does not, the person doesn't own that sidewalk.
Yes, they do.
No, they don't.
If I tripped on your sidewalk, who would I sue?
That's right. And there you go. And that's what the seniors are
You,
afraid of.
I know.
Okay? Because if somebody trips.
Again, it's not in the charter, Councilwoman. Can we
Okay.
take this offline? I don't think anybody's watching anymore.
Yeah, they are. I know they are. So real quick, there's two issues here. And so we'll just deal with them by
Sidewalks.
ordinance.
By
Trees and
ordinance.
sidewalks. But, the seniors are, sometimes even their insurance company comes out and says, you have to fix this or we're not going to insure your house anymore. We're not going to insure you anymore. So I'll drop it, but,
you
it does say in here that the council, where was that?
A, by resolution declare that certain specified
Yep.
sidewalks, curbings, and gutters shall be constructed or repaired.
So we can pass resolutions then.
That's what it says, section 164.
Okay,
Can I-
Always
okay,
thank-
Brian.
For-
I mean,
in
Councilman Casey.
65,
Nick.
it also says the council
Right.
shall assess the costs on the owners of the property, I don't know if
Right.
there's some confusion.
There's a lot of confusion.
So why don't we get rid of that portion?
It's a terrible policy, it's a
I don't-
terrible ordinance.
I think it's
Because
like state law.
there is state law. I mean, business X or homeowner X, if we as a city, or the administration, in my understanding, has a policy not to cite for sidewalks because we have a lot of poorer people who are struggling, who, if they get a citation for a sidewalk, that is $3,000 that comes out of their fridge or out of their kids' schooling, right? So we try to come up with different programs. It is a huge monetary problem. So we work and we try 50/50, TDS, different things like that. Now that we have some flexibility thanks to the taxpayers, right? But for 10 years we didn't, and our sidewalks have paid. And we know it's an issue throughout our neighborhoods. The only reason, a big reason people are buying is because they can walk somewhere. It's an important thing. We have complete and green streets. We have a number of different endeavors that try to make our streets and our neighborhoods walkable. But it is a huge issue. And forestry is part of it, sidewalks are part of it, homeowners' responsibility is part of it. If somebody were to just completely forget I'm not fixing my sidewalk, I don't care how many people push strollers or how many people in wheelchairs go by it, we do have the authority to enforce and assess. Do we? No. I mean, truth be told, but could we? Yes. Great discussion, energizing.
It's one of those real hot button issues in the neighborhood.
Always has been, agree completely.
Always has been.
Section 166, assessment bonds, public improvements, alterations or modifications in a contract, plat or subdivision, more riveting information. Does anybody have anything to add on platting and surveys? Does anybody know who the commissioner of platting is? I didn't know. I would say it's Walls. Greg probably. Greg Esper and Plats and Surveys. Ward 17 resident.
Is it?
Oh.
Important information.
There I go again. Off the cuff. Street vacation and change of name, section 176. Again, this is, vacating streets is legislative. Changing of names is legislative. We've recently put in a policy on street street name changing and honorary designations that council is trying to implement, just to get some order to it. We went through a run of a lot, and then it dries up, and then a run of a lot, and then so we want to make sure that there's a policy in place completely within council, nothing legislatively or in the charter. Justin, you're reaching for your microphone.
Yeah, what's the criterion for members of council or the administration to designate someone for a street name?
Good
I mean, how do we
Very good
identify
question.
what an accomplishment is versus
Wrote
what's
that.
not
Was
an
that
accomplishment?
Rachel or was it
Oh,
John James?
Oh, no, I didn't write that.
Didn't we just do it?
We did.
Oh, has it been, have you guys adopted it?
I'm selfishly asking
think
because
we
I
have.
want to make sure
First
I
of
know
all,
the street name
this is
anyone.
second, these are
East 9th could be
secondary.
Justin Bibway.
I think he's a boulevard guy.
I'm kidding.
No, he is kind of a boulevard. You are a boulevard guy.
Kind of a boulevard guy.
Well, these are secondary street name changes, so you're not actually changing the name of the street, so that has nothing, that has nothing to do with the charter. The name stays Oak Street, and the secondary name is Brian Casey Way.
Got it.
So that's a little different.
Named
He'll
after
just
a
give him a
nun.
lane.
There are no lanes in Cleveland.
I don't know what the criteria are. I hadn't realized you guys had actually adopted this yet. But,
We didn't adopt it
it takes something
just
more
got
than
the-
just dying. You have to, or something.
Your
You have
answer.
to,
Yeah.
you have
You're
to
sunk, Justin. Sorry,
done
buddy.
something for the community or in the community
Got it.
to set yourself apart, I believe.
Got it.
Right. But it has been discussed, I think it was earlier this
Yeah.
year, was it? Is that an operations committee, Chairman?
It is what?
Is the
No.
policy for the honorary street designation, is that sitting in your box?
It is not operations, Mr. Chair. I'll just give one example. We're busy with other things. I will tell you, one example for, Sister Maureen Doyle, we named West 48th Street south of Lorraine for her, a woman who, grew a school, helped tens of thousands of children, low-income children over her career, built a school focused on low-income children. I mean, that's like in my mind, the caliber of someone
I
you
agree.
name a street after.
I agree completely, but there is, we're still trying to crawl our way through some kind of a policy on that.
I've got a point on 176.
Yeah?
Thank you. So, Mr. Chair, thank you. On 176 street vacation or change of name, I've had the high pleasure of vacating streets in my ward, and it is a very onerous and cumbersome process, to say the least. And I can provide examples of that. My question, though, to the charter is why are there two legislative actions for a street vacation? So the first being declaring its intention, so the intent to vacate. The second being the ordinance declaring such vacation or narrowing. Again, after the declaring the intent to do so, it talks about the director of financial cause notice of such resolution, blah, blah, blah. I guess having those two legislative actions really adds a lot of time onto the process of vacating a street. And I guess I wonder if, without removing the need to notice from the director of finance, why couldn't that all be housed in one legislative action? Why are there two? And I don't know if anyone has the answer to that, but the two legislative actions really add a lot of time to the process.
So one is notice, and the second is,
So the first one, you have to introduce legislation declaring the intent to vacate a street.
right, okay.
Then,
And then the
then you
actual
have to
vacation.
introduce the actual vacation.
the
So, again, and I'm not taking away the need, as stated when it talks about the director of financial cause notice, I think that all still should apply, but why can't it be you introduce the declaration of vacation and then all of the notice
Thanks, Jim.
follows with it? It just seems, from my experience, really redundant.
And again, this is from 1931, a much different time in our city. I can only imagine, and I am completely making this up, that they wanted to make, that ensures discourse, that ensures communication with people that might live on the street.
Right.
I've never really wanted to vacate a street, kidding, but Actually, we're starting the process now, but it's on airport property. So I've never had any experience with it, except right now it was just
So-
introduced. But my guess is historically in 1931, they wanted to just not make it one piece of legislation that a man or woman council member could be mad at a street and vacate it.
Right. So one just anecdotal evidence as we talk about this, Urban Community School just built their new squash facility. It took two years to vacate that street. 2 full years.
Yep.
So,
Anybody
Yeah.
live on it?
nope, it's all their property. Took 2 years. So the point I'm asking is if there's any way to streamline this process that would still ensure notification, all of that,
Right.
I'd want to look into that. Just the 2 legislative actions seem redundant, I guess is my specific question.
But also, it's not something we take lightly. And I mean, granted,
Right.
that's one example of something that should have happened much quicker.
But
again,
I've got-
it's a street in the city.
Every experience I've had has been that way.
Okay.
Not 2 years necessarily, but
Mr. Chair, to agree with Councilman McCormack, we have vacated probably 6 or 7 streets in Ohio City over the years, largely due to when new developments come online, whether it
Right.
is something like Urban Community School. You have streets that were laid out in the 1880s through the early 1900s in configurations that no longer make any sense for what's going on. The process that you go through for that takes well over a year, easily. And I do understand the reasons why it's onerous. I think you need to be very careful about vacating streets because it completely changes the functionality of how everything functions, right? But if everyone is in agreement that it is the right thing to do, it is a really difficult process to go through.
Yeah, I didn't know.
yeah. So I don't know, to our legal minds, is there a reason for the 2 legislative actions?
Well, I think Councilman Kane said it absolutely correctly. This is from 1931, and it's all about notice and notifying the people on that street that their street's going to be vacated. My question for you is it because of the 2 legislative actions that it took so long?
Part of the
Because I
reason,
think you can
yes.
kind of truncate that, and years ago, I do remember doing an ordinance, or doing a resolution and introducing the ordinance at the same time.
So,
So I just wonder if
sure,
that
so the
might
way that
help.
it's been explained to me is you have to put the intent to vacate,
Yes.
which, and I'm
the
not
rest.
going to remember all of the requirements, but within the intent to vacate, it's not just a paper ordinance. You have to actually go through the process, at least that's what I had to do, of getting the information and the notice, and then it seemed to me like I had to do the same thing again for the resolution, which it just seemed really redundant in
Back me up. What information? So like plats and survey,
Plats and
every
survey,
parcel, common ownership,
all of that.
complete support.
Yes.
But if it's common ownership and you already did it once, I don't know how. I mean, yeah.
And maybe I just had a few really bad
Out of the
experiences,
6, Tom, how-
but
was this the worst one?
No, I mean, and again, I understand the reasoning. You will change the functionality of things, and sometimes there are complications. Gold Court, for example, which connects the parking lot behind the West Side Market to West 25th Street, next to where is now Mitchell's Ice Cream, was an alley that we had vacated to make it a pedestrian thoroughfare. There had been a building at one point next to what is now Soho Restaurant that the city owned the land on, right? And so vacating that and trying to find all the different property owners on each side, and then ensure that there was a public right-of-way that had to be layered on it so that somebody wouldn't put a building there, because we all agreed it was an important pedestrian passage. So again, that conversation is complicated, we understand that. But the legislative process, in addition to that, means it can take upwards of 2 years to do things that you've got all the right people working together, everyone's on the same page. It seems like checks and balances are necessary.
When you say legislative process and you say 2 years for 2 ordinances, we're talking about a whole lot of back work, not just introduction, first reading, second reading.
Here's what I would say. Sure, there's back work, but my question is specific to the 2. Why are there 2 Should we have proper notice? 100%. Should we build that in? 100%. Should there be backward? 100%. Why are there 2 legislative actions needed for 1 action? And I think about,
But if you do
think
the
about
intention to
zoning, you think about
vacate,
other things,
and
we don't,
takes
it
a
doesn't,
month- Right, you do intention to vacate, it takes, for introduction and
months.
passage. No, if
No,
you were to introduce it, and it gets to committee and then to council to vote, right? And then you do your legwork, and then the actual vacation.
So, and this may be a confusion then on the administrative side, there's legwork done in the intent to vacate as
Okay.
well.
Okay.
So it goes into administrative review
Yeah.
for a period of months.
Right.
Then
I
it
think
comes
that,
back,
I mean,
and
my,
then-
again, having very limited experience,
Yeah.
your frustration is with a policy on the legwork, maybe not necessarily, I mean, the two could be wrong completely, I agree. But I'm certainly not, I don't know if we have enough information to make a recommendation to the council for charter amendment. I think if we could sit down with Greg Esper, Rick Switolski,
Yeah,
who's the real estate, Commissioner DeRosa.
right.
Right?
Well,
I think
and-
they're
and
the ones that,
Yeah, and I will say,
Are the
just
ones telling
for
you
the
what to do.
record, I mean, Greg is fantastic. So
Yes.
I don't see it as, again, Greg is probably one of the hardest working people in this building, right? So I don't even necessarily see it as a staffing issue from Greg. There's just this funny thing where you have to have two of the, almost the same pieces of legislation back to back, where we don't do that with zoning, we don't do that, do we do that with
a lot of
anything?
things. I mean,
We have two,
all of the bonds, all of the capital improvements.
is that multiple readings or two different pieces of
Two
legislation?
pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
Anytime we go out to bond and then the actual expenditure.
Yeah. So I think my personal experience is I think it's unnecessary for this specific policy, and that may be a legislative change, not a charter review thing.
If you have a recommendation, make it. I don't,
Yeah.
again, I don't know enough about it, and I'm happy to do the legwork with you to come up with a
Right.
reasonable recommendation for the commission to consider for final recommendation to
It's just,
council.
and it's one of those things just to have I always like to bring it down to the anecdotal evidence, because that's what we hear and see as a council person. You know, with some of the folks that have vacated, people are now saying, well, we're going to build our project around that street, even if it's common sense that it should be vacated, because they don't want to deal with it. That's how
Right.
bad it's gotten from a policy perspective. So I'm highlighting that because anecdotally from my community, this is a big issue when it comes to building schools or building buildings or things like that. And the redundancy, from my perspective, of the two pieces of legislation is a big part of that. So, and again, that might be more of a policy legislative
Yeah.
thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I like our streets too.
I mean, the
I
legislate-
mean, if it's done, I want it done right.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think all of
Yes.
us do. And if it's an extra piece of legislation, I don't know how cumbersome it is because I haven't done it. I don't vacate. None of us do, but you do.
The legislative process, it can be as fast as you make it, you know? I mean, and taking one out of here is not necessarily going to help your issue, because there's a lot of steps that you have to take besides doing the
Well,
resolution
although-
and the ordinance. And this is also a property rights issue,
Right.
you know, in terms of the property owners and, you know, where they live.
no,
So-
and I understand all that, but couldn't that all be done under one piece of legislation is what I'm saying?
Well, you know, even if it is, you still have to go through all your
Just not
steps to
twice.
reach intent and everything.
Except just not twice.
And you have, well, but you need to give the property owners notice.
Yep,
And you do that by resolution,
yep.
and then you can, once that happens, then you can declare the street vacated.
Okay,
I don't,
okay. Again, just trying to figure out any way that we can make this process more efficient, because it's a mess.
but how does getting rid of one of the ordinances or the
So-
resolution, how does getting rid of
Yeah.
that help you?
So from my experience, we've done the same thing twice for one vacation. So we had to provide similar information, similar feedback, similar meetings in the council room for the same vacation. So Urban Community School is a great example of it. So we had the front end declaration of vacation, and maybe we botched the process and didn't need to do that twice. I'm just speaking about my personal experience with it. And then we had the same conversations when it went in for the actual.
Yeah, I
the
can see that's
committee-
very frustrating. but-
No, not the committee. It was internally. It was not even in the committee. So we had the declaration of a street vacation in which we went through all the steps of who does what and property owners and utilities, then we did it again for the.
But who
so-
told you to do that? Not the
Yeah.
charter.
Well,
It wasn't, it's
and so
not
maybe
written in
it-
section
and
177.
if that, again, if it's not a charter thing, I'm fine with that. I'm just highlighting this as a problem. And so maybe it's a policy thing and not a charter thing, which is fine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the
Yeah, I
way
would
it
get
should work is you know, put in the intent, and you go through the whole process, and then
You
it should
actually
be perfunctory when you introduce the declaration,
Okay.
and
And-
it should just go
and-
through
and-
quickly and
Yeah,
pass.
well, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, Jen, you were a part of that.
Right.
So I don't know if you can highlight what some of those issues were. Maybe I'm missing it, or,
I think it's just a matter of honing the administrative process.
okay.
But it is an issue of property rights, I think, why you first
Have the two-
declare the intent, because, you know, it would just be ignoring property rights to introduce an ordinance already declaring the vacation
I see.
before you've gone through the property rights notification. And, you know, there's also a public notice in the newspaper and Board of Revisions assessment.
Because it's public property.
No,
I mean,
understood.
For 100 and
Understood.
hundreds of years, tax dollars went to
Yeah, no, so the
care and
question is
maintenance
not
of
at all about
property.
notice or private property rights. I think that's all well and understood. The question is, should it take 2 years?
I think all of us agree that it shouldn't,
Right.
but I don't think it was the charter that
Yeah,
caused it.
so if it's not, so then if it's not a part of this piece of legislation, then it is a process problem
probably,
that
yeah.
needs to be, okay.
Which I'm also happy to sit
Yeah.
down with them and figure out if there is something we could put in the charter,
Yeah.
right? With full cooperation of all common property owners and very little blah, blah, blah. Get it done in 6 months in an effort, or 3 months, depending on, so.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I don't want to belabor this too much, but I've had the same experience. I mean, it took years.
Yep.
I only vacated one street. It had been, it began before I came into office, and I had to finish it up, and it took years. The other thing is that, I don't know if it should be in the charter so that people understand it, or if it's just that, you know, we tell them along the way, is that when you vacate a street, that's it. They have to snowplow it, they have to resurface it, it gets split down the middle between property owners, and, you know, they all say that they understand that, and then when it needs to be resurfaced, they call me up. And it's like, I'm sorry, you know, this is what you agreed to. So I don't know if there should be something in the charter that should specify what actually happens after you vacate a street.
What
as
do they
I've
think's
just
gonna happen
described.
after you vacate a street?
Then no longer does the city have any responsibility
Exactly,
for it.
it's been vacated.
I understand, but people don't understand that.
But they
I mean,
asked
they
for it.
understand it for a minute. They just want, you know, they just want the vacation, but, you know, and then years later, I've picked up one that, you know, years later, picked up a couple years later, where people insist that it belongs to the city, and no, it doesn't, it belongs to them, or they insist it belongs to them, and no, it doesn't, it belongs to the city. And, you know, I have about 4 of those like that, and it's a problem, because they don't want to maintain them, they don't want to snow plow them, you know, anything like that. So anyway,
It's a very complicated.
it's complicated, and I don't know where that goes, or if it's just a verbal thing,
Just
but
the-
somebody should have to sign that they understand what happens when they vacate a street and who's responsible for what. That's all. Thank you.
I mean, we can put that in the ordinance when we consider it, you know. but
Yeah.
All the ones that we've inherited are usually schools, right?
Yeah.
A lot of schools were built, and you have those nubs now that are people's property lines, and it's additional property, and there's trees there, and whose responsibility? So we're never gonna get rid of that. I mean, by charter, by ordinance, by anything, we're never gonna get rid of that discussion. That's part of, it's the way of the road, as they say. But thank you, Councilwoman Brady. Further discussion on chapter 1, or chapter, what are we on, 31? Hearing none, let's move on to chapter 33, appropriation of property. Section 177, appropriation. Again, this is taken very seriously. Any appropriation or vacation or doing anything with property owned by the taxpayers. I have personally very little experience with the appropriation of property as I know what it means. I don't know, Rachel, did you have anything on section, chapter 33,
But notice that there's two legislative processes there.
required for the
I'm
appropriation
just
of
just
property?